Hi guys, this is Mrs. Alberg. I'm going to be going through your classwork with you today just for a little while before I have you get into your teams and start working. Make sure you ask the substitute teacher to pause the video or rewind it if you missed something. We're going to start with question 73 and just part B. I've already built those two expressions on this mat, and we want to determine which is greater, just like we did last week. We're just going to work through the tiles here. We won't be recording all the work as we go. But just to review, remember the first thing we're going to do is flip our tiles up from the bottom. So when I flip these tiles up, those two red negative x's become positive x's. So let's go ahead and make those some positive x's. And that that positive one becomes a negative one. And that takes care of all these tiles from the bottom. And we'll do the same on the other side. On the right side, we'll get a negative x in the top, and then our four negatives turn to four positives. So now that we went ahead and flipped those tiles up, remember the next process would be to make zeros. So let's see if we can find any zeros here to make. On the left side, I see a zero here with a positive and a negative. Those two together will make a zero, so we'll be able to get rid of those. On the right side, I see a zero here with those x's. There's a zero there. And I also see a zero here with these ones. So we'll be able to get rid of those as well. So now let's go through and just get rid of all those zeros I mentioned. And let's see what happens. Normally at this point, we could do some balancing. But if I look, I have nothing to balance right now because there's nothing the same on each side. So there's nothing to balance off. That means that that step is done. I've made my zeros and I've done any balancing I can. And normally now we'd say, which is greater? Now looking at that, because we have x's left, we would normally answer, we don't know which is greater. So we'd answer with a question mark. So now what I want to do today is instead of saying we can't determine which is greater, that's not good enough for us anymore. So we need to change the question. The question is no longer going to be which is greater. Our new question is going to be what does x equal? So our new question is what does x equal rather than which is greater? That means that our mat is going to have to change. We no longer want it to be an equation mat, a which is greater than mat. We want it to be an equation mat where we say the left side equals the right side. They're balanced. They're the same. Now if I want to say which is greater, and I know that those two sides are equal now, I can say that each x on there, remember right now we have a total of, it looks like 3 x's at this point, equaling 6 ones. If we go ahead and compare each of those x's, it looks like if I take each of those x's, they're each going to have to get some of these ones the same. So it looks like if I group them together, each x is going to end up getting 2 ones. So now we're going to say, you know what, x is going to equal 2. Each x is going to equal 2 ones. That last step we did after our balancing. So now we're going to add in one more step there. And that last step after we balance is we're going to group them together. We're going to group our ones with our x's. And now we can see that x equals 2. You'll notice a few things. One thing you'll notice is our goal is to get x's on one side and ones on the other before we do our grouping. We want to make sure that's what it looks like in the end. After we do that in group, we can see that each x in this case equals 2 ones. So x equals 2. Let's take a look at 2 more examples of the same. Here's our next example. I'm not sure where my mats went here on this picture. So let's go ahead and at least just draw them in. All right, so now looking at this next one, same question. You'll notice first off that if we look at this, our mat has changed from being a which is greater than mat to an equation mat. And the way you'll notice that is because of that double bar that's there down the middle, and that's how we'll represent equals rather than which is greater. So same process, we want to decide which is greater. Remember, the first step always is to flip our negative tiles up. We're going to put 2 positive x's and a negative 1 in the top. And on the other side, we'll put a positive x and a negative 1. So the first step's done. Hopefully now you're looking for zeros. On the left side, I see a positive 1 and a negative 1 I can take off. And on the right side, a positive 1 and a negative 1. So we've made our zeros. Now we want to do some balancing. I see 2 positive x on both sides that I could balance off. So let's balance that positive x off with that one. Now we're almost to the point where we can group things together. The issue right now that I see is these 2 negative ones over here on this side. I want to get them over to the other side so that I can group together my ones with my x's to decide what x equals. Now, in order to bring them to the other side, I have to think about this as a balance. If I want to get rid of those 2 negatives, I could put 2 positives on that side. That would get rid of those. They'd be zeros. But because this is a balance, I have to put them on both sides. Now, by adding 2 positive ones to both sides, I can now get rid of these 2 negative ones and the positives I just put on because they're zeros. I have 2 extras over here on the right side, but at least I'm still balanced. Now we're to the point where we can go ahead and do our grouping. So on the left side, I see 2 positive x's, and on the right side, I have a total of 6 ones. So if I group these together, it looks like each one of those x's is going to get a total of 3 ones. And x, in the end, is going to equal 3. And that would be our final solution. All right, let's take a look at one last example together. The equation's listed there at the top, and I went ahead and built it for you. Let's work through this example, and I'll try to show the steps as we go the best I can in writing. Now, the first thing we do is flip up, but we have nothing to flip up. And when I look for zeros, I only see a 0 on the left side, a positive 1 and a negative 1. So if I rewrite what I have right now, I'm sorry, those were on the right side. If I rewrite what I have right now, on the left side, I have 2 x's and a minus 5. And on the right side, I have 4 x's and a plus 1. And that was after my making zeros. The next step I would want to do right now is to balance. So let's balance off 2 x's from each side. And so I'm going to take away 2 x's from each side. And right now then on the left side, I've got 5 negatives. And on the right side, I have 3 x's and a plus 1. Now we're getting really close to being able to group. The problem right now is that I have this positive 1 over here with these x's. So I need to get it to the other side. Remember, to get it to the other side, I'm actually going to have to put a negative on both sides, because putting a negative there is going to make a 0. But whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So we really subtracted 1 from both sides by adding a negative 1. And now on the left side, I have a total of negative 6. And on the right side, I have 3 positive x's. The final step would be to go ahead and do our grouping. So as I group, it looks like I get 2 negatives with each of those x's. So in the end, 1x equals a negative 2. And that would be our final solution. Notice that our x's were negative, and that's okay. Our positive x resulted in a negative answer, and that's acceptable. What I want you to do right now is go ahead and get into your team. You're going to try number 76 together, and you're going to have lots of equations to solve, so you're going to want to get your equation mats and your tiles and work through these. When you're finished, 77 to 81 is your homework for tomorrow. So go ahead, here's question 76. Go ahead and apply what I just showed you to solve each of those equations. Remember to start by building them and work through step by step. We'll go over the answers tomorrow. Good luck.